She survived the battlefield fighting for her country, but inside her own city, racist cops treated her like a criminal. What happened next shocked the entire nation. The rain had barely stopped when she stepped out of the small corner store. Drops still clung to her pressed military jacket, glistening faintly in the glow of the streetlights. Her medals caught a flicker of yellow light with each careful step, reminders of deserts crossed, battles endured, friends buried beneath foreign soil. She carried only a small grocery bag, simple things for the evening, yet the way her hand gripped it was firm, protective, as though it contained not bread and fruit, but the last fragile remnants of her peace. Across the street, 2 police officers leaned against their cruiser. They had been circling the block for nearly an hour, restless, hungry for confrontation. Their eyes found her instantly, not drawn by the shine of her medals or the neatness of her uniform, but by the shade of her skin. She felt their gaze before she even looked up, the weight of it pressing against her chest like an unspoken threat. She kept her stride steady, her back straight, her breathing even, the way she had taught her soldiers to do when under fire. But the battlefield had rules, codes of honor, even between enemies. Here in the city she called home, those rules dissolved into something uglier. The first shout came sharp, cutting through the night air. "Hey, what's in the bag?" The voice was accusatory, not curious. She turned slightly, meeting their eyes with calm, respectful firmness. "Groceries," she said, simple, truthful. But truth carried no weight with men who had already made their decision. They moved toward her, boots splashing through puddles, their faces twisted, not with duty but with disdain. "Suspicious," one muttered, his hand brushing the edge of his holster as though the word itself was justification. She lifted her chin. She had led convoys through war zones, had stared down enemy fire, and now she found herself staring down 2 men wearing the same flag she had bled for. Her voice was steady, each word measured. "I serve this country. I have nothing to hide." But instead of softening, they laughed. Not the laughter of men amused, but of men who enjoyed the cruelty of the moment. One tilted his head mockingly, glancing at the medals pinned proudly to her jacket. "Yeah? And what good did that do you?" His smirk widened, feeding on the tension. Neighbors peeked from windows, curtains shifting like nervous breaths. No one stepped outside. Fear kept them hidden, fear of the badges, fear of the power sewn into blue fabric. She stood alone, shoulders squared against the storm gathering around her. It escalated quickly, as these things always did. Words turned to orders. Orders turned to force. One officer grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back with unnecessary brutality. Pain shot up her shoulder, but she refused to cry out. She winced, gritted her teeth, held her ground. "You're making a mistake," she said. Her voice did not waver, though inside her chest a fire burned. The cuffs clicked shut. Cold steel, biting into her wrists. Her grocery bag tumbled to the wet pavement, spilling apples that rolled into the gutter like little casualties. She watched them scatter and felt the bitter sting of humiliation. She had carried rifles, carried wounded comrades, carried the weight of survival. But tonight she was not trusted to carry even her own groceries. They dragged her toward the squad car, one muttering as he shoved her forward. "Should have stayed. In your lane." The words dripped with contempt, a verdict handed down without trial. She stumbled, caught herself, lifted her head. Tears blurred her vision, but her voice remained steady, whispered not for them but for herself. "If I could survive war, I can survive this." But inside, she knew it was more than an arrest. It was an assault on her dignity, a betrayal of the promises stitched into every flag she had saluted. Her sacrifices had earned her nothing in their eyes. Not respect, not gratitude, only suspicion. The ride to the precinct was suffocating. The cruiser smelled of rubber and sweat, the cage between her and the front seats pressing the reality of captivity into her lungs. Outside, city lights blurred past, indifferent. She closed her eyes, not in surrender but in memory. She saw the desert, the heat waves shimmering over sand. She heard the voices of her squad, laughter mingling with fear, trust stronger than blood. Out there, they had been united. Out there, color had meant camouflage, not condemnation. Now she sat handcuffed behind men who mocked her, their casual chatter slicing deeper than any bullet. Another one off the street, one said. Bet she thought those medals made her special. Their laughter filled the car. She sat in silence. Every word etched into her, each insult a scar she refused to let fester. The precinct loomed, harsh fluorescent lights buzzing against the night sky. They shoved her inside, the cuffs grinding against her skin. The room reeked of burnt coffee and stale authority. Desks cluttered with reports, walls plastered with faded notices, the machinery of law grinding on with indifference. Yet tonight it would become a stage for something far greater than routine. The officers paraded her through the room like a trophy, sneering, jeering, taking pleasure in her restraint. One leaned close, his breath sour, his words venom. Tell me, was it worth it? Fighting for a country that doesn't give a damn about you? His smirk begged for her collapse, but she gave him nothing. Her silence was a weapon, her gaze unbroken. They scribbled lies into their reports, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, threatening behavior. Each word a stone, heavy enough to bury her reputation, her record, her freedom. Yet she sat upright, her spine unyielding, forged from years of carrying burdens heavier than lies. She thought of her fallen comrades, of promises whispered over flag-draped coffins. We will not bow. They fingerprinted her, took her photo, mocked her medals. Mugshots suit you better than ribbons, one joked. Laughter erupted again, sharp and cruel. Her heart ached, but not for herself. She thought of every young black girl who might one day wear a uniform, who might one day believe service could shield her. Tonight was proof it could not. And just as despair threatened to crack her armor, the air shifted. Heavy boots pounded outside, car doors slammed, voices barked orders sharp and commanding. The precinct's rhythm faltered, laughter dying in, throats. Then the glass doors burst open. A wave of dark jackets flooded the room, each marked boldly with 3 letters that carried the weight of authority: FBI. Their presence was electric, stripping the air of arrogance. The officers froze, shrinking back into corners like children caught in their own lies. The night was no longer theirs. The agents carried files, thick folders of truth long buried. Complaints documented, misconduct recorded, whispers turned to evidence. They had not come by accident. They had come for reckoning, and in the center of it all, the veteran sat bound but unbroken, her eyes blazing as the tide began to turn. The room froze as the FBI agents stormed forward, their boots striking the tiled floor like drums of judgment. The precinct, once filled with laughter and mockery, now felt as though it were shrinking under the weight of their presence. Fluorescent lights flickered above, casting sharp shadows on the faces of officers who only minutes ago strutted with arrogance, now paling with dread. Every whisper, every movement, every shallow breath carried tension thick enough to choke. One agent, taller than the rest, stepped ahead. His badge gleamed as he held it out, his voice booming with authority. This woman is under federal protection now. The words cut through the silence like a blade, erasing the false authority that had gripped the room. The officers glanced at each other, searching for confidence but finding none. Their swagger collapsed into excuses before their mouths even opened. She resisted. One stammered. She threatened us. His voice shook, lacking the conviction he had wielded against her moments earlier. Another officer, scribbling earlier with such certainty, now struggled to hold his pen, his fabricated report trembling in his hands. Lies were easier in the dark, harder beneath the floodlights of truth. The veteran sat still, hands cuffed, but spirit untethered. She watched the agents spread through the precinct, methodical, precise, each one carrying a folder thick with evidence. Body cam footage confiscated, eyewitness testimonies already gathered, a federal warrant prepared. They weren't here to debate. They were here to dismantle. The captain emerged from his office, face tight with irritation, trying to project command. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The lead agent didn't flinch. He handed over a warrant stamped with federal authority, his tone steady as stone. "We have evidence of a pattern of misconduct, falsified arrests, and racially motivated abuse. Tonight, it ends." The captain's jaw clenched, color draining from his face as the pages turned against him. Names, dates, charges, all documented. The room seemed to echo with the cries of those wronged. Black teenagers locked away on fabricated charges, veterans dishonored, single mothers arrested for crimes invented on paper. The list was longer than shame could cover. The officers tried to speak, their excuses tripping over one another. "She was aggressive. We followed procedure. But the weight of the evidence crushed their words into dust. Each attempt sounded more desperate, more hollow, more pathetic against the quiet fire burning in the veteran's eyes. One agent stepped forward, his hands careful as he unlocked her cuffs. The contrast was striking. The gentleness of justice against the brutality she had endured. Her wrists were raw, skin marked by the steel that had held her. Yet as the cuffs fell away, she inhaled deeply, as though freedom itself had returned to her lungs. Her spine straightened, her head lifted, dignity flowing back into every inch of her being. The lead agent turned to her, his expression softer now, though still edged with gravity. "You're safe," he said. But she knew safety was relative, fleeting. What mattered was accountability, not just for her but for all those silenced before her. Her gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of the men who had tried to break her. She saw their sweat, their twitching hands, their faltering masks of authority. For once they were the ones cornered, the ones afraid. Her voice, calm but unwavering, carried through the precinct. "Every lie you wrote, every bruise you left, every life you shattered, it ends tonight." The captain tried to regain control, but the agents drowned him out, their voices cutting through the tension. Warrants were read aloud, officers' names matched with misconduct, each revelation slicing deeper into the illusion of order. One by one, the walls of their fortress crumbled. The agents began the arrests, badges stripped from trembling chests, handcuffs, cold, unforgiving, snapped onto wrists that had once abused them without hesitation. The irony was not lost on her. The same steel that had bound her in humiliation now bound them in disgrace. Some officers hung their heads, shame washing over them in waves. Others stared blankly, refusing to accept the fall. But acceptance or not, the fall had come. Neighbors who had once watched from behind curtains began to gather outside. The news spread fast, carried by whispers, texts, phone calls. A crowd formed at the steps of the precinct, voices hushed at first, then rising, with cautious hope. They had seen the cruelty, endured the silence, feared the retaliation. But now, through the glass doors, they saw justice walking in with boots heavy enough to shake the ground. The veteran was led out by the agents, her steps steady, her jacket still damp from the rain but her presence commanding. Cameras flashed from the growing crowd, capturing her face, tired but unbroken, weary but radiant with resilience. She became a symbol in that moment, no longer just a soldier, no longer just a victim, but a witness to the truth that prejudice could not forever hide in shadows. The lead agent paused beside her as they reached the doors. "Do you wish to press charges?" His question carried more than legal weight. It carried the weight of history, of future, of justice denied too long. She hesitated only for a breath, her eyes burning not with tears of weakness but of strength. She thought of every girl watching, every soldier forgotten, every family grieving. Her answer came firm, resonant, final. Yes. Every last one of them. The words struck the room like thunder. Officers shifted uncomfortably, their bravado dissolved. The crowd outside erupted, not in chaos but in something deeper. Relief, vindication, the sound of chains cracking, of silence breaking. Inside, the captain stood paralyzed, his authority stripped bare. The agents didn't look at him for permission. They didn't need it. The law now moved above him, beyond him, sweeping him and his years of ignored complaints into its net. His face was pale, his jaw slack, his silence louder than any denial. Handcuffs clicked shut on wrists that had written lies, drawn weapons, mocked sacrifice. The air buzzed with the sound of consequence. And through it all, the veteran stood taller, her presence a mirror forcing them to see themselves stripped of illusions. As the disgraced officers were led out, the crowd parted, their cheers rising in waves. Some wept openly, others lifted phones, to capture history unfolding in real time. She walked beside the agents, but it was her figure the crowd focused on. To them, she was no longer just an individual. She was a symbol carved in steel and scar, proof that dignity, once stolen, could be reclaimed. And as she stepped out into the cool night air, the rain finally cleared, the clouds parting to reveal a sky scattered with stars. She tilted her head, back breathing in the freshness of a night reborn. Somewhere inside, grief lingered, anger burned, but hope, fragile, luminous, began to stir. The story was no longer just hers. It belonged to a nation forced to look at itself in the mirror. The air outside the precinct was alive with noise, but for her the world moved in a strange, slowed rhythm. The night smelled of rain and asphalt, of smoke rising faintly from damp rooftops, of something changing in the marrow of the city itself. The crowd pressed closer, not with hostility, but with reverence. Strangers' eyes locked onto her, their voices weaving her name into chants that spread like fire. Some called her soldier, some hero, others simply shouted justice. She stood at the center of it all, her uniform still damp, her wrists raw, but her presence commanding in a way no one could deny. She raised her chin, scanning faces, young, old, weary, hopeful. Among them she saw children on their parents' shoulders, their wide eyes reflecting both fear and wonder. She thought of the children she had seen in war zones, clutching dolls made of rags, their innocence threatened by violence. And now here, in her own city, she saw children facing a different battlefield, the struggle to believe in a system that often betrayed them. Tonight, maybe, they glimpsed a different possibility. The agents guided her toward a waiting vehicle, but she stopped at the top of the precinct steps, her boots planted firmly on the concrete still wet from rain. She turned, her voice steady, though her heart pounded like a drum. "They tried to break me," she said, projecting outward, her words carried by the growing hush of the crowd. "But instead, tonight, we broke them." A roar answered, a swell of voices that echoed through the street, bouncing off brick and glass reverberating like a hymn of defiance. Cameras caught every second. Journalists had arrived in droves, lenses aimed, microphones raised, recorders blinking red. By morning, her words would blaze across headlines, her face would fill screens. Her story would spread like wildfire beyond the boundaries of her city. She was no longer anonymous. Her name, her struggle, her dignity reclaimed. It would all belong to the nation now. The agents ushered her inside the car, but she didn't sit small in the back seat like a victim ferried away. She sat tall, her shoulders squared, her medals still pinned through damp, each one glinting under the flash of lights. The cameras loved her, but this was not vanity. It was necessity. Symbols carried power, and tonight, she had become one. Drive away from the precinct was silent, but she could hear the chants fading behind, following her like an echo of protection. She looked out the window as the city passed by. Streets she had walked her whole life, now changed forever. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Tired eyes, wet hair clinging to her face, but behind it all, unbroken fire. She whispered, to her reflection, to her comrades gone, to every silenced voice she carried within her. This is only the beginning. At a safe house nearby, the FBI offered her water, a blanket, a quiet room. She accepted, but rest was impossible. The adrenaline still surged in her veins, her thoughts unraveling and weaving again. She saw images of what had happened, apples rolling into the gutter, cuffs biting her wrists, laughter like knives, the sudden slam of the precinct doors when justice arrived. It all replayed, sharp and relentless. Yet beneath the pain, clarity bloomed. This wasn't just about her. It was about exposing an infection that had festered in silence for too long. By dawn, the story had gone national. Her phone, confiscated during the arrest, was returned by agents. It buzzed endlessly, calls, messages, notifications flooding in. Old comrades reached out, voices cracked with rage and pride. Family sent prayers and tears. Strangers wrote words that poured through the screen. You are not alone. You are our voice. You are our strength. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened the window and let the morning air wash over her. The city looked different under the sunrise, the sky painted with fragile gold. She wondered how many mornings she had stood overseas watching dawn rise over battlefields, asking herself if sacrifice meant something. Today she felt the answer stirring, not complete, not finished, but real enough to hold on to. By noon she was standing before cameras again, this time not as a prisoner, but as a witness to truth. A press conference had been arranged, the FBI flanking her, but they allowed her to speak first. She stepped up to the microphone, the weight of a nation's gaze pressing down. She inhaled, steadying herself. And then she spoke. Not polished, not rehearsed, but raw, unfiltered, the voice of a soldier who had seen too much and refused to be silenced. I wore this uniform in places where every sunrise was borrowed time. She began, her voice carrying across the sea of reporters. I fought for a flag that promised liberty and justice for all. But last night that promise was denied to me because of the color of my skin. And if it can happen to me, a veteran, a soldier, it can happen to anyone. It has happened to too, many already. But it ends now. It ends with truth. It ends with accountability. It ends because we will not bow. The crowd erupted, cameras flashing like a storm of light. Her words shot across television screens, spilled onto front pages, ricocheted through social media. Hashtags sprang up with her name. Communities marched in solidarity. Across the country, people whispered her story in barbershops, classrooms, church pews, and in police stations far from her city, officers felt the weight of her defiance pressing into their own unchecked arrogance. But beyond the roar of headlines, beyond the fire of protests, she carried a quieter truth. She had not chosen this. She had not asked to be a symbol. She had only wanted groceries, a quiet evening, a chance to breathe in the peace she had earned. Yet the battle had found her again, in her own streets, beneath her own flag. And now, as always, she would not retreat. Weeks passed, investigations unfolded, indictments stacked. Officers once untouchable now faced trials, their smug grins replaced with courtroom stares hollowed by consequence. The captain himself was led away in handcuffs, his career reduced to ash. And with every headline, every verdict, her story remained, the spine of it all. She returned often to the community that had gathered outside that night. She walked those same streets, greeted neighbors who now met her with pride instead of fear. Children who had once hidden behind curtains now ran up to her, tugging at her sleeves, calling her hero. She knelt to their height, reminding them gently, the real hero is anyone who refuses to be silent. At night she still dreamed of war, both the deserts abroad and the battle in her own city. The faces of fallen comrades haunted her, but so did the faces of those officers, twisted with arrogance, now exposed in their downfall. She carried it all, heavy as always, but now she carried it not alone. The nation carried it with her. One evening, she stood again beneath a clearing sky, rain washed away, stars scattered like metals across the heavens. She whispered softly, to no one and everyone, they tried to take my dignity. Instead, they gave me a louder voice. And the wind seemed to answer, carrying her words beyond rooftops, beyond streets, beyond borders. Her battle was not over. Prejudice does not fall in a single night. Injustice does not end with a single arrest. But she had cracked the walls, torn the veil, forced a nation to see. That was her victory. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself a small, steady smile because she knew Dignity once stolen could always be reclaimed, and courage once awakened could never again be silenced.